Do you feel like you're always busy but never getting anything important done? Despite our best efforts, many of us find ourselves trapped in a cycle of busyness without meaningful progress. And if one thing is clear, is that the way we work doesn't work anymore. But it turns out there is another way, a way to work less while achieving more, accomplishing your goals without sacrificing your health, relationships, and peace of mind. In this video, we'll explore 10 lessons I learned from this great book, Slow-Productivity by Cal Newport. And these insights are helping me break free from the business cycle and reclaim the energy, focus, and mental clarity needed for stress-free productivity. So let's get straight into work with lesson number 1, which is the rise and fall of pseudo-productivity. Why are we as knowledge workers always on the edge of burnout, feeling stressed, mentally tired, and rushing through our days yet not accomplishing anything of value? What went wrong? Cal explores these questions and realizes that in the past, productivity was easy to measure, like how many crops were harvested or products made during the Industrial Revolution. But measuring the productivity of knowledge workers, well, that's a different story. Cal tells us that it's hard to overemphasize how unusual it is that an economic sector as large as knowledge work lacks useful standards definition of productivity. So without a clear definition of productivity, companies struggle to manage employees effectively, and entrepreneurs also face challenges with self-management. And as a result, we started using visible activity as the measure for productivity. Cal tells us if you can see me in my office, or if I'm remote, see my email replies and chat messages arriving regularly, then at the very least you know I'm doing something. And as we went from creating value to being busy for a living, we built the habit of working on many things, hoping to make progress that way. This approach is artificial and unsustainable. We take on more and more commitments until we can't manage them, and we use stress as our internal compass for when to stop. But more stress means less clear thinking, and for knowledge workers, clear thinking is crucial, as your success will depend more on the quality of your mind and thoughts than the quantity of time you work. And this is the mindset shift that is essential that you make. You don't need the latest productivity method or software or whatever. What you need is to understand that the way you think about work is not working, and to radically change your perspective. Of course, Cal proposes to us the slow productivity philosophy, which he describes as a philosophy for organizing knowledge work efforts in a sustainable and meaningful manner based on the following 3 principles. Number 1, do fewer things. Number 2, work at a natural pace. And number 3, obsess over quality. We'll now explore 3 key ideas of each principle. We'll start with principle number 1, which is to do fewer things. Your mission, according to Cal in here, is to strive to reduce your obligations to the point where you can easily imagine accomplishing them with time to spare, and to leverage this reduced load to more fully embrace and advance the small number of projects that matter most. The first idea we're going over in this principle is the overhead tax. Whenever you agree to a new commitment, it brings with it a certain amount of ongoing administrative burden, such as emails, meetings, follow-ups, etc. Cal calls this the overhead tax, and it activates as soon as you take on a new responsibility, be it a minor task or a large project. These admin chores take more time away from your core work, trapping you in a high business, low productivity state. And as we do fewer things, we increase the raw number of hours dedicated to useful activity. And furthermore, the quality of these hours also increases. Our brains work way better when our cognitive load, which is the quantity of information our brain holds onto at any given moment, is reduced. And as we stop rushing through the day and constantly switching between a huge amount of tasks, our mental clarity and cognitive performance increase. And this is why doing fewer things doesn't mean accomplishing less. In fact, it is the exact opposite. So the long-term strategy here is to reduce the quantity of your commitments so that you can lower your overhead tax. But what about the short term? What can you do right now? Well, this question leads me to the next idea, which is to contain the small. Now, if you're spending more time thinking or talking about what needs to be done than actually doing it, and the problem lies more in cognitive load and the overhead tax than on the execution of the real core work, then you might be, of course, less overwhelmed than you think. And the following strategy reduces that business to the bare minimum and increases fast execution of your core work. The overhead tax is real, and you can't can't escape it, but what you can do is contain it. In other words, admin tasks are endless, but time is fixed. So what you want to do here is to define an admin block and maybe a communications block in your digital calendar. Start with 1 hour for each and adjust as needed. This way you'll be containing the huge amount of tiny tasks that distract you throughout the day in just a few time blocks, which will also help you to focus deeper outside of them. Beyond the time blocks, these admin and communications tasks don't exist. The rest of your time should be spent in deep focus work. But how do you determine what to work on during your focus blocks? That leads us to the next idea, which is one project a day. Cal defines a project as anything that can't be achieved in only one work session. And he tells us to focus on only one project a day. When planning my days, after checking the calendar, I look at the today and the upcoming views, which shows tasks that have dates. So for me, those are time-sensitive tasks. They need to get done. I know that the urgent and time-sensitive tasks have been taken care of, so I can now focus on one single project. Now, principle number 2 is to work at a natural pace. Our mission here is to not rush our most important work. Allow it instead to unfold along a sustainable timeline with variations in intensity and in settings conducive to brilliance. Again, we have 3 ideas here. The first one is to activate your subconscious. Cal's main message in this principle is that the monotonous pace we work at is both artificial and unsustainable. Even if you implement the strategies from the first principle, you'll feel as tired and as burned out as usual if your work rhythm remains the same day after day, week after week, and month after month, and year after year. Why? Well, because you'll be working against your biology, and that will stress your brain. So if you want to work with your biology rather than against it, you need to embrace the difference in intensity levels throughout our days and life that's natural to how human beings worked across all of our history. And previously, we didn't have a choice. We just adapted to what was natural and unavoidable, things seasonality and agriculture. But now, we need to proactively design our working lives so that we have this variability in rhythms. And as a consequence of having these different intensity levels throughout your days and life, you'll activate the power of your subconscious. When our minds wander, we activate the default mode network, which is the mental place where we solve problems and generate our best ideas. In other words, if you actually make the time for your mind to get bored instead of rushing from one thing to another, you create the optimal conditions for your subconscious to work for you and for you to actually listen to what it has to say. This may sound a bit woo-woo, but the classic example of this is when you are in the shower and the solution you were struggling so hard to see just appears in your consciousness. So when we are getting paid by the quality of our thoughts, basically, this is the key to working smarter, not harder. Now you might say, well, Fran, that's great, but how can I actually implement this? First, we'll look at the micro, or how to make waves on a daily basis. This one is not in the book, but it's how I personally like to implement this stuff. Then we'll look at the macro, or how to work at a natural pace on a yearly basis. Idea number 6, and the second one of this principle, is to make waves. For every 90 minutes of work, we know that our brain needs about a 20-minute break to sustain cognitive performance during the day. You could also adapt this to something like 50 minutes of work with 10 minutes of rest, which is really easy to implement because it is an exact hour, but the key here is to oscillate. Just as you wouldn't want to see a straight line on a heartbeat monitor, you also don't want to see a straight line during your cognitively demanding day. You want waves. So when you are on, be fully on. Focus on one single thing for an extended period of time, avoiding multitasking or switching between tasks. And when you are off, be completely off. Avoid checking email or social media or engaging in any activities that involve external information when you are resting. Instead, use that time to take a walk, stretch, meditate, or do whatever you want that allows your mind to actually recharge and prepare for the next work session. The next idea is to work in cycles. Jason Fried is the co-founder and CEO of a software development company called Basecamp, where they use cycles to tackle projects and periodize their work. So instead of working towards yearly and quarterly goals at a monotonous level of intensity, they consolidate their work in cycles that last from 6 to 8 weeks. And during those weeks, teams focus on projects with a clear outcome that they can achieve within that cycle. The most important thing here is that they wrap things up with a 2-week cooldown period that enables them to recharge, fix small issues, and plan the next cycle. Cal tells us that this strategy embraces the natural seasonality of human effort. If Basecamp demanded that employees work with focus and urgency without a break, their overall intensity would drop as exhaustion set in. When they instead regularly take time off between cycles, the work completing within the cycles achieves a higher level of quality. Now, it might not seem that way, but there are lots of ways in which you can adapt this strategy into your own working life. As it is a flexible idea at the end of the day, you can determine, for instance, the number of weeks within a cycle and organize them in your calendar however you find most convenient. You don't need to make them fit within a specific month or quarter. For instance, if you have a trip or vacation or event or whatever coming up, you can plan a cycle that ends just before it, so that the cooldown period is baked into your plans and you don't take work with you when you are trying to rest. This is what we all implicitly do at the end of each year around Christmas and New Year. The strategy here would be to bake this in a bit more during the year so that we can operate at a higher level of cognitive performance within the more intense week in a sustainable way that actually produces greater results, especially in the long term. Now, for those that work in a company, Cal gives you two options. If you are brave enough, you can propose the idea of making cycles a formal policy, pointing to the Basecamp handbook as support that you can find online, and I will leave a link in the description below. The other option that you have is to quietly implement cycles without others knowing. The 2-week cooldowns are too short for anyone to actually notice, and what will instead be noticed is your increased intensity during the cycles themselves. The third principle is to obsess over quality. And your mission here is to obsess over the quality of what you produce, even if it means missing opportunities in the short term, and leverage the value of these results to gain more and more freedom in your efforts over the long term. The first idea in this principle is your way out. This is the principle that makes slow productivity not only possible, but imperative. Quality both demands and enables a slower approach to our work. It demands that you slow down because the focus required to get better is simply not compatible with busyness. And at the same time, it helps you take control of your professional efforts and have the leverage to break free from pseudo-productivity. Once you become really good at what you do, you've found your way out. You are now in a position to break free from the busyness cycle, and you are also forced to do so to some extent, because people will be after the quality of your work, not after the quantity of commitments you take on or the speed at which you reply to your messages. This way, slow productivity becomes an inevitable part of your life, and it is here that you stop earning with your time and you start earning with your mind. I'm sure we all have someone that comes to mind here, and to me it's my dad. He worked hard over many years, he took risks and bet on himself as an entrepreneur early on in his journey, and aligned his efforts with his natural inclinations and innate talent. All of this meant missing opportunities in the short term, but he remained patient and persistent, and over time he became one of the best at his craft. And instead of leveraging that value to gain more money, he focused on gaining more freedom and autonomy. And now he gets to design his days in whatever way he wants to. He can do fewer things and work at a natural pace, and at the same time he needs to operate in that way. Otherwise, the quality of his thinking will decrease as stress and overload increase. So his greatest challenge today is to resist that inner tendency to do more, which always fires back. Of course, there are times that are more intense than others, which, as we've already discussed, is natural to slow productivity. But within us, we all have that force of doing more and more, which sometimes we need to rebel against. If you want to break free from the busyness cycle, you need to focus on becoming, as Cal might say, so good they can't ignore you. You will need to sacrifice short-term success, as you still need to bake in some slowness into your days to get better. Remember that quality both demands and enables more focus and less stress. But an important warning here is to not use quality as an excuse to procrastinate. Being a perfectionist will stop you from reaching a high level of quality in whatever it is that you set out to do. If I obsess over the quality of my writing or videos but don't publish anything because it is just not good enough, then I won't put in the reps to get better. Quality requires quantity, but, and a very important but, it requires the quantity of reps of one thing, not on lots of things that fracture your focus. Now, to stay motivated and consistent, you need to develop a sense of faith and trust in the process. The next strategy will hopefully provide the mental models necessary for you to do that. Idea number 9 is to store your efforts. Now, kind of a random idea here, but do you know how ships travel from one place to another? If you follow their path on a map, you will of course see a straight line from point A to point B. But if you zoom in enough, you'll see that they travel in zigzags. Now, the process towards becoming great at what you do requires years of zigzags. And because of the nature of it, you'll see that nothing will make sense looking forward, right? You're not going in a straight line, but everything will make sense looking backwards. You will get to see the straight line once you zoom out and once the years have passed. This is why Cal tells us that the magic of slow productivity becomes apparent at longer timescales. You need to remind yourself that as long as you're focusing on learning skills and developing your mind, your efforts are not being wasted, they are being stored. The reason for this is that quality comes from playing iterated games, and it is a result of the compound effect, which is why if you're focused on the right things, you'll be exposed to what James Clear brilliantly describes as the valley of disappointment. In his phenomenal books Atomic Habits, he provides this image, and he tells us that we often expect progress to be linear. At the very least, we hope it will come quickly, but in reality, the results of our efforts are often delayed. It is not until months or years later that we realize the true value of the previous work we have done. This can result in a valley of disappointment, where people feel discouraged after putting in weeks or months of hard work without experiencing any results. However, this work was not wasted, it was simply being stored. It is not until much later that the full value of previous efforts is revealed. Now, when this happens, realize that this disappointment you feel is a reverse indicator. It is not a sign that something is wrong and that you need to change what you're doing. It is a sign that you are doing the right things, that you are doing what needs to be done to get the maximum return on your investments, because you are working the compound effect. And that's where the magic happens. All of this leads me to the last idea of the video, which is the short-long strategy. Now, with this in mind, it is clear that we don't want to rush the long-term process of playing iterated games. However, it is extremely easy for each of us to eventually give up and chase short-term success instead. The uncertainty, the fear of missing out, and the need for more are all powerful enemies we need to constantly fight. We need to create the conditions so that when they hit, we are able to overcome them. And this is not in the book, but the way I've been able to do this in my own life after a lot of trial and error is to have both a short and a long-term strategy. I think of my short-term strategy as the minimum effective dose I need to not need anything from my long-term efforts. This will look different for every one of us, but that's the main idea. My long-term work strategy revolves around building a personal brand and becoming the best in the world at what I do. However, if I needed to monetize my creative work as fast as possible, I know from experience that I wouldn't be able to say no to short-term opportunities, shiny objects, and to have the patience required to embrace this process. I know that in order for me to achieve my long-term goals and my desired lifestyle, I need a short-term game plan in place that's not tied to the success of the long-term work. This is why, besides creating content, building courses, and obsessively studying the field of peak performance, which are all things linked to my long-term strategy, I also focus on creating the conditions to not need anything from these activities right now. I try to keep my expenses low. I work with a few clients at a time. I optimize for freedom instead of income. I reinvest my short-term earnings into education. I build in public and enhance my understanding by teaching what I learn. Of course, you are the only one who knows what this should look like in your life. What I'm trying to say is that you need to operate in a similar way so that you get to reap the huge returns on your efforts the compound interest will provide you if you let it. And this is the strategy that's helping me work the compound effect and not rush it. Besides, you also need to arm yourself with psychological tools and mental models to overcome these enemies of uncertainty, fear of missing out, etc. Being economically able to be patient doesn't mean that you'll be psychologically able to do so. You need to develop your mind so that you stay strong in the face of uncertainty and that you are able to take risks by trusting in yourself. If you want to learn more about how to prepare your mind for the challenge, make sure you watch this video that will appear on the screen. A big hug, and I'll see you over there or in the next one.